Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me from where and what time you're watching? Thanks. New Year's Eve. It always sneaks up on you, doesn't it? That weird time of year when everyone's either desperately clinging to the hope that the next 12 months will be different or just trying to forget the mess of the last 12. For me, it started out like it usually does, with my best friend, Lena, dragging me into something I wasn't totally sure about. This time, it was a massive house party in the city. "Come on," she'd said, practically bouncing with excitement as she tugged on her boots. "It's at this crazy, old Victorian place. You'll love it. It's got like charm, character." Character, I'd repeated, rolling my eyes. "That's just code for drafty and falling apart." She'd laughed, tossing me a scarf. "You'll thank me later. Trust me." And because I always did, I found myself shivering on the cracked steps of a house that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. It had this sagging roofline and windows that seemed to glare at you, their frames warped and peeling. The kind of place where you half expect a ghost to swing open the door instead of some overenthusiastic party host. But the second we stepped inside, the cold outside melted away. It was replaced by the heat of too many bodies packed into one space and the bass of music so loud you could feel it in your chest. Lena disappeared almost instantly, like she always did, her wild curls vanishing into the crowd before I could even take off my coat. Typical Lena. I stayed back, hovering near the kitchen, clutching a plastic cup of something vaguely champagne-like. It was fizzy and warm, but it worked. The air smelled like cheap cologne, spilled drinks, and that faint, musty undertone that clings to old houses no matter how much you try to mask it with Febreze. I wandered after a while, letting the energy of the place pull me along. Every room felt like its own little world. In the living room, people were dancing like their lives depended on it, limbs flailing in a way that made me smile despite myself. Upstairs, I stumbled on a group crowded around a guy with a guitar, singing so loudly and off-key that it was borderline painful. But there was something sweet about it too. Like they didn't care how they sounded as long as they were together. I leaned against the doorframe for a moment, soaking it in, the way the guitar strings twanged, the way their laughter cut through the melody. It felt alive. That's when I noticed him. He was standing by the staircase, close enough to the crowd to blend in, but far enough to keep himself separate. He wasn't doing much, just watching, but there was something about the way he did it. His eyes moved over the room, sharp and focused, like he was taking stock of everything and everyone. It wasn't just him, though. A few minutes later, I spotted another guy down the hall. Same vibe. Still watchful, like he was waiting for a signal only he could hear. And then another, leaning against the bathroom doorframe, arms crossed, scanning the space like he was trying to memorize it. I felt the hairs on my neck prickle, that low, uneasy hum you get when something isn't quite right. But it was New Year's Eve, and strangers watching strangers wasn't exactly breaking news. So I shook it off, or tried to. Midnight came faster than I expected. Someone started the countdown, and the whole house joined in, the energy reaching a fever pitch. 10, 9, 8. People shouted, glasses raised, phones in hand, recording the moment like they needed proof they were happy. I laughed, caught up in it despite myself. 3, 2, 1. The room exploded. Cheers, hugs, kisses, glitter raining down from somewhere above. Pure, unfiltered joy. And then, the scream. It started low, sharp, and guttural, cutting through the celebration like a knife. The music stopped mid-beat, leaving this eerie, vibrating silence. For a moment, it was like the whole house was holding its breath. Then chaos erupted. Someone bolted for the door, shoving past me so hard I almost dropped my glass. Shouts echoed from downstairs, followed by the crash of something heavy. Glass breaking? Furniture? I turned toward the staircase just in time to see them. 2 men, ski masks pulled tight over their faces, charging up with baseball bats. My stomach dropped like a stone. One of them was the guy I'd seen earlier, the one by the stairs. I froze, caught between disbelief and the sharp jolt of adrenaline telling me to move. Panic swallowed the room. People screamed, shoved, and ran in every direction like startled birds. I fought my way through the crowd, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know where Lena was, didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away. I ended up in a small bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands shook as I twisted the lock. The sound of splintering wood and heavy footsteps outside made my chest tighten. My eyes darted around the room looking for something, anything, to keep me safe. That's when I saw it. The window. The latch was old and stubborn, refusing to budge under my fumbling hands. Outside, the chaos swelled. Someone shouted, "Phones, wallets, move it. Now." There was a crash, something heavy slamming against the walls, and then the sickening sound of someone crying, begging. My breath hitched. I yanked at the window harder, my fingers slipping against the icy glass. Finally, it gave. The cold night air hit me like a slap. Without thinking, I climbed onto the narrow ledge, gripping the sill so hard my knuckles went white. Below, the street was eerily quiet, the chaos muffled by the walls of the house. A car idled near the curb, headlights casting long shadows. A man stood next to it, calm as anything, pulling a duffel bag from the trunk. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. It made my stomach churn. Behind me, the door to the room burst open with a deafening crash. I didn't think. I just jumped. The fall wasn't far, but it felt like forever. I hit the ground hard, the impact rattling my bones and knocking the wind out of me. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then instinct kicked in and I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline propelling me forward. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my legs shaking. Behind me, the sounds of the house faded, replaced by the rhythmic pounding of my own footsteps on the pavement. When I finally stopped, my back pressed against a brick wall. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I tried calling Lena. Once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. Every time. The rest of the night is a blur. I found out later that the men had torn through the house, smashing everything in their way, taking anything of value. Lena was hurt, badly, trying to help someone escape. She made it out alive. But the spark that made her Lena? It wasn't the same after that. New Year's Eve is supposed to be about new beginnings. But for me, it's just a reminder. The fireworks started long before midnight that New Year's Eve. Little pops and cracks here and there, followed by louder booms that made my windows shudder in their frames. People were celebrating early, letting the colors splash across the cold winter sky. The whole street was alive. Music spilled out of houses. Kids ran around with sparklers. Neighbors stood in clusters, laughing and holding drinks. It looked like the kind of night that should have felt warm and festive. But for me, it didn't. I hadn't lived in this neighborhood long, just a couple of months. I didn't know anyone well enough to feel included. There were invitations, of course, polite ones from Mrs. Thompson, my next-door neighbor. She'd asked me if I wanted to join her small gathering more than once. It's nothing fancy, just a little champagne. Some good company, she'd said with a smile that reached her eyes. But I declined. Politely, of course, but firmly. I'm more of a quiet New Year's guy, I told her. Thanks, though. The truth was, I wasn't much for celebrations. Not after the last couple of years. My divorce had drained me of any desire to be social. The holidays had become a time I mostly endured rather than enjoyed. I spent most of them alone, with a beer in one hand and the remote in the other, convincing myself it was better that way. Tonight was no different. I sat on my couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. The muted hum of the TV was background noise to the distant cracks of fireworks and bursts of laughter from the street. It wasn't quiet, but it felt empty. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a dull thud, faint enough that I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, and again. A series of heavy, deliberate sounds came from the townhouse next door, Mrs. Thompson's place. I paused the TV and listened. The thud stopped for a moment, replaced by something else, muffled voices. I couldn't make out what was being said, but there was something off about the tone. It wasn't cheerful, like the sounds of a party. It was sharp, angry. I leaned closer to the wall, straining to hear, but the voices quieted. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had dropped something, or maybe it was just part of the chaos of the holiday. I tried to go back to my scrolling, but my chest felt tight. Something about it wouldn't let me relax. And then I heard it, the scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of scream that would make you think of a horror movie, but it was sharp, sudden, unmistakably human. It was the kind of sound that raises every hair on your body, that makes your heart pound before your brain has time to catch up. I froze. My thumb hovered over my phone screen, unmoving. For a few seconds, I just sat there, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it sounded like. But the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something awful to happen. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, hurried, purposeful. They moved through Mrs. Thompson's house, then stopped abruptly. My stomach turned. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? The operator asked, her voice calm and steady. I think something's happening next door. I stammered. My voice sounded strange, even to me. Small, almost afraid. I heard noises, like banging, and then a scream. The operator asked for my address, and I gave it to her. As I spoke, I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. That's when I saw him. A man I didn't recognize stepped out of Mrs. Thompson's front door. He was wearing dark clothes and carrying what looked like a duffel bag. His head was down. His movements were quick, almost jerky, like he didn't want to be seen. He glanced around once, then hurried down the driveway and disappeared into the shadows. Someone just left her house, I whispered into the phone. He had a bag. I think he might be the one who I couldn't bring myself to say it. Stay inside and lock your doors, the operator instructed. Officers are on their way. Minutes dragged by like hours. I sat by the window, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, watching the street. Finally, I saw the flashing red and blue lights of patrol cars. Two of them pulled up in front of Mrs. Thompson's house. Officers stepped out, their hands on their holsters. I watched as they knocked on the door. When no one answered, they forced it open. From my vantage point, I could see glimpses of movement inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness, shadows crossing back and forth. Then one of the officers ran outside, his face pale. He shouted something I couldn't hear. Another officer went to the radio on his shoulder, calling for backup. It wasn't long before more cars arrived. Detectives, paramedics, and more officers poured into the house. I watched it all unfold from my window, my stomach churning. I didn't need anyone to tell me what they'd found. I could see it on their faces as they came back out. Whatever had happened in that house, it wasn't good. Later that night, a detective knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Detective Harris and asked if I'd heard or seen anything unusual. I told him everything. The noises, the scream, the man with the bag. He nodded as he took notes, his expression grim. "Thank you for calling this in," he said. "It might have saved someone else's life." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. Someone else's life, not Mrs. Thompson's. My chest tightened. Was she? I couldn't finish the question. Harris sighed. "We found her inside. She didn't make it." Over the next few days, the neighborhood buzzed with fear and speculation. No one could believe it. Mrs. Thompson had always been kind, quiet, and helpful. Who would want to hurt her? The police found the answer soon enough. The man I'd seen, the one with the duffel bag, was caught trying to pawn some of her jewelry. He turned out to be her nephew, someone she'd been trying to help despite his troubled past. When she refused to give him money that night, he snapped. The whole thing left me shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been, how I'd been sitting just a thin wall away while it happened. If I'd called sooner, could I have stopped it? Could I have saved her? Every New Year's Eve since, I think about that night. It was my first New Year's in my new house, and I'd pictured it so clearly in my mind. Cozy, peaceful, and completely uneventful. I'd spent years dreaming about a space of my own, and now it was real. This snug little house, with its creaky floors and charmingly outdated fixtures, was finally mine. The first thing I'd done was set up a reading nook by the bay window. I imagined endless quiet evenings with my books, my cats, and the occasional glass of wine. It felt like the perfect place to breathe, to settle into the next chapter of my life. I'd worked so hard to get here, balancing my new PhD program while scraping together every extra penny I could. My dad had stepped in at the last moment, helping me with the final stretch of financing. When I signed the papers, I felt this overwhelming sense of pride. Sure, it wasn't fancy, but it was everything I needed. The neighborhood seemed ideal too. Quiet, slow-paced. The kind of place where people waved hello but otherwise kept to themselves. Or so I thought. From the day I moved in, my next-door neighbor, Mr. Holden, made his presence known. I'll admit, he didn't seem threatening at first. He was in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and a slightly awkward, overly friendly demeanor. The kind of guy you might call eccentric in a small-town way. Everyone in the area seemed to adore him. At the local coffee shop, the barista practically lit up when I mentioned him. "Oh, Mr. Holden's your neighbor? He's the best. Always helping people out. You're lucky to have him. Lucky. That word would come back to haunt me. Holden was the first to greet me. Before the moving truck even finished backing into the driveway, he was there, hovering on the sidewalk with a big smile plastered on his face. "Need a hand with those boxes?" he asked, not waiting for an answer before grabbing one. He insisted we exchange numbers. "Just in case," he said. At the time, I thought he was just being neighborly. Maybe a little overzealous, but harmless. The first time he texted me, it was simple enough. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Let me know if you need anything." I thanked him. Left it at that. But after my dad went home a few days later, things started to shift. That evening, Holden sent another text. "Left a little something for you on the porch." Curious, I opened the door and found a small, hand-painted trinket box sitting there. It was uneven, amateurish, with a clumsy drawing of a cat on the lid. It made my stomach tighten. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it a thoughtful gesture? Or something else entirely? I thanked him again, but my unease lingered. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the texts became more frequent and personal. At first, they were innocuous. "How are you settling in?" Or "Do you need help with anything?" But then the tone shifted. He started using pet names. "Sweetie," "Darlin'." My responses became shorter and less frequent, but it didn't deter him. Eventually, I sent him a polite but firm message. I appreciated his kindness, but I wasn't comfortable with how familiar he was becoming. His response was a rambling wall of text about how lonely he was, how misunderstood, and how he just wanted to be friends. Then came the gifts. At first, they were odd but harmless. Fishing lures in my mailbox, a wooden figurine left on my doorstep. But one day I found a wreath made of what I could only describe as animal bones hanging on my back fence. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at it, trying to convince myself it wasn't as disturbing as it seemed. Maybe it was some kind of bizarre art project. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I didn't confront him. What could I even say? He was my neighbor and I had to live next to him. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, I'd convinced myself to stay inside and focus on work. I had my cats curled up on the couch beside me, my laptop open, a mug of tea warming my hands. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, aside from the occasional faint pop of distant fireworks. Around 10 p.m. I heard strange noises outside. Muffled thuds, scraping sounds, what might have been muttering. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just some neighbors setting up for a party. Then my phone buzzed. It was Holden. "Happy New Year. Come outside. I've got something special for you." My heart sank. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the window and peeked through the blinds. What I saw froze me in place. Holden was in his yard, pacing erratically with a gasoline can in his hand. His movements were frantic, almost animalistic, as he poured a thick line of gas in a wide circle around his yard. My breath caught in my throat as he struck a match. The fire roared to life in an instant, casting an eerie orange glow that made his face look unhinged. He turned toward my house, his eyes wild, and started shouting. "You think you're too good for me, huh?" Sitting in there, acting like you're better than everyone else, his voice cracked with anger, rising to a fever pitch. "I'll show you. I'll show everyone." I stumbled back from the window, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my phone. As I dialed 911, his voice cut through the air again. "Happy New Year. You stuck-up little harlot," he hurled the empty gas can into the fire, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. He laughed. A horrible, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. The fire department and police arrived quickly. The firefighters doused the flames before they could spread. The police tackled Holden to the ground. He didn't fight them, just kept muttering about how the voices had told him to do it. I watched the whole thing from the safety of my living room, my knees drawn to my chest, my phone clutched in my hand. But it didn't end there. A few days later, I saw him in his yard like nothing had happened. He'd been released on some technicality, and the no-contact order I filed seemed meaningless. He waved at me when I went outside, his gaze lingering too long, a smug smile on his face. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Now, every New Year's Eve, I can't help but relive that night. The roar of the fire, the crackling of the flames, the way his voice sliced through the cold air. My boyfriend moved in shortly after, and we're saving every penny to leave this place. But until then, I'm stuck here, knowing Holden is still next door. Every midnight, as fireworks light up the sky, I hold my breath and wait. Because deep down, I know it's not over. Not really. That New Year's Eve, it started like so many others. Full of fragile hope, the kind you cling to when everything feels like it's falling apart. I wish I could tell you I was excited or even mildly optimistic about the night. But honestly, I wasn't. My little sister, Emma, though, she had this way of pretending everything was okay. She'd commandeered the couch, wrapped herself up in what looked like every sweater we owned, and was sipping tea from that old chipped mug she refused to part with. She'd even insisted we decorate, even though all we had was one string of half-working fairy lights. She hung them up around the window and stepped back like she'd just lit the Rockefeller Center tree. I didn't have the heart to tell her how pathetic they looked. For Emma, that tiny flicker of light was enough to lift her spirits. For me, though, not so much. I sat across the room, staring at my phone like it was a lifeline. That morning, the landlord had sent his final warning. $1,200 or we were out. Midnight deadline, no extensions, no exceptions. The weight of it sat heavy in my chest. Every time I glanced at Emma, it got worse. She didn't deserve any of this. Her health was already a battle on its own, and now we were teetering on the edge of losing the only thing keeping us sheltered from the cold. By the time the streetlights outside flickered on, I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in. "I'm going out for some air," I muttered, grabbing my coat. Emma tilted her head, concerned. "You okay, Liam?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "I just need a minute. Don't wait up." Her expression softened into that gentle, almost stubborn optimism she had. "We'll figure this out," she said. I nodded, not trusting myself to respond. Then I stepped out into the night. The streets were alive with celebration, which only made me feel worse. Everywhere I looked, people were laughing, holding hands, popping champagne corks. Every smile and every burst of laughter felt like a reminder of how far I was from that kind of joy. I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked aimlessly, my thoughts spiraling in a loop of desperation. $87 in my account. That's all I had. The number mocked me, playing on repeat in my mind like a cruel joke. I ended up in front of this old bakery that had been closed for years. The air smelled faintly of stale flour and dust. I sat on the steps, my head in my hands, staring at the cracked pavement when this man appeared. And when I say appeared, I mean it. 1 second the sidewalk was empty, and the next he was standing there like he'd been conjured out of thin air. He was tall, dressed in a gray suit so sharp it could have cut glass. His shoes gleamed under the flickering street lamp, spotless in a way that made him seem almost otherworldly. "You look like someone with a problem," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. I should have ignored him. I know that now. But in that moment, with the weight of the world pressing down on me, I looked up. "What's it to you?" He smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was thin, calculated, like he already knew what I was going to say. "It's New Year's. Time for fresh starts. I offer solutions." Before I could respond, he pulled a black card from his pocket and handed it to me. It was simple, almost unnervingly so. A single phone number embossed in silver. No name, no logo, just a number. "Call if you're ready to change your luck," he said. Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I stared at the card for a long time, the cold air biting at my face. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A reminder from the landlord. Midnight. No excuses. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach tightening. I didn't want to make the call, but I didn't see another way. When I finally dialed, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, almost robotic. "What do you need?" My throat felt dry. "I need the landlord gone." There was a pause. "Address?" I hesitated, then gave it to him, my voice barely above a whisper. The voice confirmed the details, then added, "Payment is $50. Non-refundable. Once confirmed, there's no going back." I wired the money before I could think too much about it. "It will be done by midnight," the voice said. Then the line went dead. Walking back to the apartment felt like walking underwater. My chest was heavy. My mind raced with doubts and fears. Emma greeted me with that same warm smile she always had, and I couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. She'd made instant noodles and set the table, her attempt to make something special out of nothing. I tried to eat, but every bite tasted like ash. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't. As the hours ticked closer to midnight, the tension in the room became suffocating. Emma was humming softly in the kitchen, rinsing out her mug while I sat on the couch, staring at the door, waiting. At 11:45, there was a knock. My heart stopped. "I'll get it," Emma called, but I was already on my feet. "No," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. She froze, confused. "I'll get it," I added, trying to sound calm. When I opened the door, the landlord was standing there, his scowl deepening as he saw me. "Time's up, Liam," he snapped. "Where's my money?" Before I could respond, a shadow moved behind him. My breath caught as a hooded figure stepped out of the darkness. There was a glint of metal, a sharp movement. The gunshot shattered the night. The landlord crumpled to the ground, his blood pooling on the concrete. The hooded man didn't even glance at me. He turned and walked away, his steps steady and deliberate, disappearing into the shadows. Emma screamed, running to my side. "Oh my God, Liam, what just happened?" "Who what?" "I don't know." I lied, my voice trembling. "Someone just shot him." Minutes later, sirens filled the air. The police came, asked their questions. We told them the story they wanted to hear, that the landlord was attacked by a stranger. They left us with hollow reassurances and a heavier silence than before. At midnight, Emma and I sat together on the couch. The fairy lights blinked cheerfully behind us. Outside, fireworks burst in the sky, bright and careless, as if mocking the nightmare we just lived through. Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I thought about the man in the suit, the black card, and the price I'd paid. Not just in dollars, but in guilt and fear in knowing I'd started this. "We'll figure it out," I said, wrapping an arm around her. The words felt hollow, but I had to believe them. For her. The new year had arrived, and it was already stained with blood. You know how life has this way of falling into a predictable rhythm. The same routine day after day. Commuting at the same time, working those same hours, walking home through the same quiet streets. Some people might call it boring, but for me it was comfortable. I liked knowing what was coming next. It's like having a little bubble of predictability, and I didn't mind it one bit. There was something reassuring about it, no surprises, no stress. Just get through the day and everything's fine. I thought that was all I needed to know. It was New Year's Eve. The office was dead quiet by the time I finished, the way it always is on the last day of the year. Everyone else had taken the day off or was already out celebrating, but I didn't have any big plans. The city was already buzzing with the excitement of the holiday. Streets filled with people shopping, laughing, getting ready for the parties that would go on until dawn. But for me, it was just another night, a walk home, and a quiet evening. I left the train station, the air crisp and cold, mixing with the smell of street food from the vendors near the corner. The crowd was thick, but as I made my way down the sidewalk, the noise and chaos slowly faded. I wasn't thinking much about it until I noticed something felt off. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a feeling, a vague sense that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was. A man not too far behind me, walking at a steady pace. I didn't think much of it. People walk alone at night all the time. I told myself I was being paranoid and tried to shake it off. But when I glanced back a few moments later, I caught his eyes. He wasn't looking at the ground or the city around him. No, his gaze was fixed directly on me. There was something unsettling about it, something almost calculating, like he was waiting for something. I quickened my pace, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe he just happened to be walking in the same direction. But as I picked up speed, I noticed something even stranger. He didn't change his stride. His footsteps matched mine perfectly, like he was trying to stay in sync with me. That's when a knot tightened in my stomach. I turned a corner, trying to lose him in the shadows, but when I checked behind me, there he was. Still there, just a few steps away, like he had been following me for miles. Panic started to creep in, settling in my chest like a weight. I didn't know what to do. Should I keep walking or should I run? I had never been one to overreact to things like this, but something about the situation felt wrong. I ducked into an alley, hoping to disappear, but I could still hear his footsteps, each one closer than the last. I pressed myself into the shadows, clutching a broken bottle I found on the ground, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I waited. The silence felt like it lasted forever. His footsteps stopped right beside me. I could hear his ragged breath, the echo of his shoes scraping the pavement, but he didn't see me. Not yet. I held my breath, praying he'd just move on, but he didn't. For what felt like a lifetime, he just stood there. And then finally his footsteps faded as he walked away. I stayed still, barely daring to breathe, hoping against hope that I'd lost him. When I finally dared to peek out, I saw nothing. Maybe it had all been in my head. Maybe I'd overreacted. I made my way home, trying to shake the feeling that something had shifted. The door clicked behind me, and I went through my usual evening routine, pretending like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the night had been different. Something had felt wrong from the start. I didn't tell Maria. I didn't want to worry her. It was probably nothing, right? I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But that night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the city outside my window was too heavy, too unnatural. I kept hearing things, the creak of the floorboards, the wind rustling outside. And then it happened. Something that would make me question everything. I woke up to cold steel pressed against my throat. My heart skipped a beat as my eyes snapped open. And there he was, the man, standing over me in the dark. His breath smelled like booze and something worse, and the knife in his hand pressed harder against my skin. "Move an inch," he growled, his voice rough, "and I'll slit your throat." The panic hit me like a wave, but I couldn't move. My body froze. I couldn't believe this was happening. It didn't make sense. He shouldn't be here. What do you want?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper through the fog of sleep. "Money," he spat. "Give me your money, and I'll leave." I nodded, trying to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. My mind was a mess. How did he get in? Had he been watching me the whole time? I scrambled for my wallet, trying to get a grip on my racing thoughts. That's when I saw Maria, still in bed beside me. She had woken up too, but instead of staying hidden, she grabbed the gun from under the mattress. I saw her panic. She pulled the trigger too soon. Click. The safety hadn't been released. The sound of it filled the room like a death sentence. The man heard it, turned for just a second, and I took the chance. I shoved him with everything I had. His fist slammed into my face, pain radiating through my jaw, but I kept moving. I didn't stop. My family needed me. I stumbled toward the kids' room, but he was faster. His knife sliced through my leg, and I went down, pain shooting through my body, but I wouldn't stop. I couldn't. I heard Maria yelling, trying to fire the gun again, but nothing happened. She was too frantic. And then I heard his voice, low and dangerous. "Get away from her." I turned just in time to see him standing at the top of the stairs, his knife pressed against Sabrina's neck. My daughter's wide eyes filled with fear. "You had to ruin it," he muttered, his voice shaking with rage. I felt everything drain out of me. My strength, my blood, my will to keep going. But I knew I had no choice. If I didn't act now, everything would be lost. "If you hurt her," I said, my voice a quiet growl, "I'll kill you." It was a threat I didn't know I could make. It felt foreign. His eyes flickered with doubt, but then he didn't care. He was too far gone. Maria fired again, and this time the bullet didn't miss. The man stumbled, crashing down the stairs with a sickening thud. Another shot rang out, and then silence. The police arrived, but the whole thing felt like a blur. Questions, statements, checking the kids, the hospital. They said it was self-defense. They said I did the right thing, and physically we were okay, but none of us were really okay. That rhythm I had, the routine, it's not safe anymore. Not after what happened. I started taking self-defense classes. I learned how to handle a gun, but none of it could ever make me feel normal again. Now, I still walk home every night, but it's different. I can't help but scan the shadows. There's always a thought in the back of my mind, the one that keeps asking, what if? I thought New Year's was just another night, but it wasn't. It was the night that changed everything. It was supposed to be one of those typical New Year's Eve nights. You know the kind, the quiet, predictable ones. I had no grand plans. My usual tradition was to curl up in my room, maybe watch fireworks from the window, and avoid the whole celebration scene. But this year was different. It all started with Nina, my best friend, calling me just before sunset. Her voice was practically bursting with excitement as she invited me to join her boyfriend Luke, and their friend Max at the downtown New Year's festival. I wasn't sure at first. I mean, I hadn't really gone out for New Year's Eve in ages, and the thought of a big crowd wasn't exactly appealing. But Nina's enthusiasm was contagious, and soon I found myself saying yes. It had been a while since I'd gone out, and there was something about the way she talked about the festival that made it hard to resist. The air at these things always seemed to be charged with some kind of energy, a sort of magic that I couldn't quite explain. Maybe I was craving that feeling. I grabbed my jacket and practically ran down the stairs, finding my older brother Eli sprawled on the couch. I hesitated for a second, but asked if he could give me a ride. He raised an eyebrow at me, like he was trying to figure out what kind of trouble I was about to get into. After a long, dramatic sigh, he agreed. It wasn't the most exciting of drives, but I appreciated it. I was still getting used to leaving home after such a quiet year, but somehow I knew I needed to be there, surrounded by the noise and the people. It felt like the right thing to do. When we got to Nina and Luke's place, I was surprised to find Nina already outside, waiting for us. Her hair was a mess, windswept and all over the place, but she was grinning from ear to ear. She introduced me to Max, who was, well, nice enough, I guess. But there was something about him that didn't sit quite right with me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, or maybe I was just being paranoid. Either way, I pushed the feeling aside. First impressions can be deceiving, right? Eli dropped us off and we piled into his car. As we drove through the busy streets toward the festival, I could feel that strange sense of anticipation rising in my chest. The night was crisp and the streets were alive with energy. People walking in groups, laughing, talking, their voices mixing with the faint hum of music spilling out from the nearby bars. Fireworks were on the horizon, ready to light up the sky, and the crowd around us felt like it was pulsing in sync with the ticking clock, inching closer to midnight. The festival grounds were packed, like a swarm of bees buzzing from one place to another. As we navigated through the crowd, I felt myself start to relax. Nina was bouncing around with excitement. Luke kept cracking jokes that made everyone laugh, and Max, well, he was sort of off to the side, quiet, lost in his own thoughts. It felt like a typical festival night, carefree, easy, and fun. We grabbed snacks, corn dogs, cotton candy, and went on a couple of carnival rides. The lights were dazzling, and the sounds were infectious. But somewhere, in the back of my mind, I couldn't quite shake this feeling that something wasn't quite right. Around 11 p.m., we decided to take a break. The idea was to head back to Nina's apartment to hydrate before the fireworks, and maybe grab a quick breather before the countdown to midnight. The streets were still crowded, and the noise of the festival slowly began to fade behind us as we walked. The street lights above flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows across the pavement. It was odd. Suddenly, everything felt quieter, heavier. It was like the noise had disappeared, but the tension was still there, thick in the air. Nina, Luke, and Max didn't seem to notice. They were still laughing, enjoying the night, totally unaware of the strange stillness that seemed to have crept over the place. But I felt it. It was like we were being watched. I didn't say anything at first, maybe I was just being dramatic, right? But I couldn't shake it. I pulled my scarf a little tighter around my neck and quickened my pace, closing the gap between myself and Nina and Luke. By the time we got back to Nina's flat, I thought I'd shaken off the feeling. We went inside, had some water, and tried to settle down. The distant sound of fireworks popping in the air signaled that the countdown had begun. But even though the sounds of celebration were starting to rise again, that same unease kept gnawing at the back of my mind. It felt like the night had shifted, like something was wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Then, at 11:40 p.m., just when we were about to leave again to catch the midnight fireworks, Nina suddenly remembered something. She'd forgotten her pain medication back at her place. It was the one thing she couldn't sleep without, and she couldn't risk going without it. No big deal, right? Just a quick detour. But Nina, she didn't seem like herself. She was quieter than usual, her face tight with tension. Her eyes kept darting around, scanning the space like she was looking for something, or someone. I asked her if everything was okay, and she gave me this tight, forced smile. "Of course," she said. But it didn't feel right. I could tell something was off, and I didn't push her. Sometimes we all have our moments, right? We stepped outside again, and Nina suggested we take a different route, on the other side of the street where there were more streetlights. It was the smarter choice, really. Max, Nina, and I didn't exactly have the best night vision, and the other side felt brighter. But as we crossed to the other side, Nina's voice dropped to a whisper, low and shaky. "Don't look behind us." I froze. My heart hammered in my chest. Was someone following us? My breath caught in my throat. Nina was walking faster now, her pace quickening, and she shot a glance at me. I wanted to ask what was going on, but something told me not to push it. There was no time for questions. "Walk faster," she whispered urgently. We did. almost instinctively. It was like our bodies knew something that our minds didn't. The streets felt colder, the air thicker. My heart was pounding in my ears now, and every step felt like it was echoing. I couldn't help myself. I glanced back. My stomach dropped. 3 men, all dressed in dark hoodies, their faces hidden behind bandanas, walking slowly but steadily behind us. I couldn't see their eyes, but I felt their gaze, like they were waiting for something. Why were they dressed so warmly on a night that was unusually mild? Why didn't they blend in with the crowd? Nina caught my glance and whispered, "They've been following us since the flat." My blood turned to ice. The chill wasn't just from the night air, it was the cold, creeping feeling of being hunted. We started walking faster, our footsteps sounding too loud now, like we were amplifying the tension. But they were still there, keeping pace, moving too synchronized. The men were slow, deliberate, almost like they were enjoying the chase. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, as though the air around us had thickened and made it impossible to breathe. Every step felt heavier, like I was dragging myself through quicksand. When we reached a narrow alley, Nina's eyes flicked toward it. "We'll take the shortcut through the bushes," she said. And I knew it was risky, but staying out in the open felt worse. We didn't think twice. We darted into the alley, cutting through the bushes, doing our best to stay quiet. But as we moved, the sound of footsteps behind us grew louder. Too loud. We ran. I don't even know how long we sprinted for. My legs felt like jelly, my breath ragged. The cold air burned in my lungs, but I didn't care. I didn't stop until we burst into a crowded parking lot near the festival. The noise was a relief, a brief respite from the weight of the silence that had pressed down on us. But even in the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling. I turned around. They were still there, watching. It was the night of New Year's Eve 2018, and I found myself alone in a cabin deep in the woods of Oregon. You know, the kind of place that looks straight out of a brochure, nestled among towering pines, designed to offer you a little peace and quiet, away from the rush of life. Perfect for someone wanting to escape everything for a while. And at first, it seemed like the perfect spot. Quiet, serene, and far from anyone or anything. But after a few hours in that cabin, I started to feel like there was something out there in the woods watching, waiting. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. The job itself had been simple enough. I'd been tasked with helping build this cabin for some rich couple who wanted to spend their winters off the grid. It had taken a few weeks, but we were nearly done. The roof was on, the walls were up, and now it was just the final details, trim work, electrical stuff, and a few random bits and bobs. The rest of the crew had left earlier that day, all heading into town to ring in the new year. But me, I stayed behind. Company rules were clear, no theft. And let's face it, there were enough power tools and expensive lumber lying around to tempt even the most honest person. I wasn't risking my paycheck over a stolen hammer. So there I was, sitting alone in the unfinished cabin, the only sound the soft hum of the lantern flickering next to me on the floor. The air was cool, that damp chill that only comes from being in the woods. It wasn't uncomfortable, just isolated. I kept my book in hand to pass the time, hoping the rain would hold off. The walls smelled of fresh pine, the kind that makes the whole place feel earthy, like nature had just begun to claim it as its own. All around me, the trees stood silent, as if they were guarding the place. The only sound was the occasional creak of the wood as the cabin settled. Then, by around 8 p.m., the storm started. It wasn't supposed to rain, but as usual, nature didn't care about the weather forecast. At first, it was just a light drizzle, a soft tapping on the roof. I hardly noticed it. I was in my own little world, reading and thinking about the year ahead. But then by 10 p.m., the rain had turned into a full-on downpour. It wasn't just falling anymore, it was coming down in sheets, hammering the roof and making the trees sway violently in the wind. The whole cabin seemed to shudder with the force of it. The plastic sheeting we'd used to cover the unfinished windows slapped against the frame with every gust of wind, and it added to the chaos of the storm outside. I tried to focus on my book again, but now the rain was so loud it felt like it was drowning everything else out. And there was something else, a sound that didn't belong. It started off slow, like someone was tapping on the walls, maybe just testing the structure of the cabin. But it didn't stop. It grew louder, more deliberate. The tapping circled the cabin, moving around it in a strange rhythmic pattern, like someone or something was walking around the outside. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unable to move. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and pressed it up to the window frame, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm had turned the world outside into an inky blur. Rain poured down in torrents and the trees looked like dark, twisted figures leaning in close. I couldn't see anything through the sheets of rain, but the tapping, it was still there. It stopped for a moment, and I exhaled, trying to convince myself it was just the storm. Then came a thud, a sharp, unmistakable sound, like something had struck the back of the cabin. My stomach dropped. My mind was screaming at me to stay calm. It had to be a branch, right? Just the storm. But the way that noise had sounded, it wasn't just the wind. My hands shook as I grabbed a hammer from my bag. It felt ridiculous, but it made me feel just a little less vulnerable. I slipped out of my chair and moved as quietly as I could to the back of the cabin, every step echoing too loudly in the stillness of the place. The wind howled above me, and the walls groaned with the weight of a storm. The air felt thick, like something was pressing in from every side. I pressed my ear against the wall, holding my breath. Silence. Then a scraping noise. It was slow at first, almost deliberate, like something, or someone, was dragging metal across wood. My blood went cold. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't just a storm. I switched off the flashlight and plunged myself into darkness, waiting. The scraping stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the storm. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, right against the wall where I was standing. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest, legs shaky like they couldn't hold me up. The noise had stopped, but the silence was deafening. It felt like the whole world had gone still, except for me. My mind was racing, and every instinct in me was screaming to run. But there was nowhere to run to. The woods outside were too dense, too wild. And anyway, I wasn't even sure I could make it back to my truck without whatever was out there noticing me. My only option? Barricade myself inside. I grabbed a few planks of wood from the pile in the corner and nailed them over the doors and windows as quietly as I could. The hammering was loud, but the storm was loud enough to drown most of it out. I worked fast, my hands trembling, sweat starting to form at the back of my neck. When the barricades were in place, I sank into the corner, clutching the hammer with white knuckles. My flashlight was still shaking in my other hand. The wind howled, and the rain drummed on the roof like 1,000 hammers. But the silence inside the cabin was almost unbearable. The tapping had stopped, but something told me that wasn't the end of it. Then I heard it again. A scraping sound, this time coming from above. Nails on wood. It crawled across the roof, slow, deliberate. The flashlight shook in my hand as I stared up at the ceiling. My breath held tight in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Then bang. A crash. Something heavy had fallen from the roof and it hit the ground with a loud thud that echoed through the woods. I froze. For a moment there was nothing. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, but I stayed perfectly still, listening, waiting. Minutes passed. The storm raged outside, but inside it felt like time had stopped. The tension was so thick, I could almost feel it pressing against me. That's when I caught a scent, a metallic, iron-like smell. My stomach dropped. Blood. It was coming from the front door. I moved slowly toward it, flashlight in hand, but I could hardly keep it steady. My hands were shaking too much. When I reached the door, my stomach twisted. There, pooling under the door, was a dark, thick liquid. I shone the flashlight on it, and I could barely make sense of it at first. But then it hit me. Blood. Just as I was about to react, a scream tore through the night. It wasn't human. It was guttural, wild, like an animal in pain, but with something unmistakably human in it. The sound sliced through the storm, sending a chill up my spine. My heart stopped. I backed away from the door, tripping over a chair in my panic and falling hard onto the floor. The scream echoed through the trees, fading into the night. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stayed on the floor, trembling, listening to the storm. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually the first light of morning broke through the plastic-covered windows. The storm had passed. The wind had died down. The rain had stopped. Everything was still. I unbarred the door with shaking hands and stepped outside, my legs weak. The ground was a mess. Mud, broken branches, debris everywhere. And then I saw them. Footprints. Bare human prints, leading from the back of the cabin and disappearing into the woods. The air was thick with the smell of blood, but there was no sign of anyone. I packed up and left before noon. The crew didn't believe me when I told them what had happened. They said it was probably a wild animal or just my imagination. But I knew. What I'd heard, what I'd smelt, none of that was natural. To this day, I can't explain it. I can't make sense of what happened that night. But I know one thing for sure, whatever was out there wasn't human, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it wanted. You ever hear that saying, you can never truly know someone? I used to think it was just one of those things people say to sound deep, like something you'd find on a motivational poster in a dentist's office. But after what happened that New Year's Eve, I understand it in a way I never wanted to. It's one of those nights that sticks with you, no matter how much you try to shake it off. And trust me, I've tried. So, let me take you back. My name's Alex, and I grew up in this little town called Maple Hollow. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and traditions are sacred. And the biggest tradition? The New Year's Eve celebration in the town square. Every year, the whole town gathers under the clock tower to count down to midnight, bundled up in scarves and jackets, sipping on cider or cocoa. It's simple, but it's ours. That year, though, I almost didn't make it. Not because I didn't want to go, believe me, I did, but because my mom had a request that couldn't wait. You see, we had this old mantel clock that had been in our family forever. It sat right in the middle of the living room, ticking away like some heartbeat for the house. A few days before New Year's, it stopped. Just like that. My mom, she took it as some kind of omen. We can't start the year with a silent clock, she told me. Her hands on her hips like this was a life or death situation. Take it to Mr. Grayson. He'll fix it. Mr. Grayson was the town's clockmaker, a sweet old guy who ran a shop just off Main Street. Everyone knew him, and everyone trusted him. He was the kind of person who always had a kind word, a warm smile, and a pocket full of peppermint candies for the kids. Fixing clocks was more than his job, it was his whole life. So there I was, trudging through the snow with the clock wrapped in an old blanket. I figured it'd be a quick errand, drop off the clock, maybe warm up for a minute, and head to the square in time to join the countdown. Simple, right? If only. The little bell over the shop door jingled as I stepped inside, and I was instantly hit by the warmth. It was the kind of cozy heat that makes your cheeks flush and your fingers tingle after being out in the cold. The air smelled like varnish, oil, and a faint hint of something metallic. Clocks covered every inch of the walls, their ticking filling the room like a heartbeat. Alex, Mr. Grayson called from behind the counter. He looked up from a small pocket watch he was working on, his wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. What brings you out on a night like this? I set the bundled clock on the counter and shrugged. It's my mom's clock. It stopped ticking a few days ago, and she's convinced the new year can't start until it's fixed. He chuckled, that warm, fatherly laugh he was known for. Ah, mothers and their superstitions. Let's take a look. While he worked, I wandered the shop. I'd been there before, but something about it felt different that night. The shadows seemed longer, the light dimmer, and the ticking it was louder, almost unnervingly so. It was like the clocks were trying to outdo each other, their rhythms competing in some strange, dissonant orchestra. Good news, Mr. Grayson said, pulling me out of my thoughts. It's an easy fix, but it'll take a little while. Why don't you stick around? I'll even show you something special, a little tradition of mine. I hesitated. Tradition? He smiled, his eyes twinkling. Every New Year's Eve, I celebrate time in a way most people can't imagine. Would you like to see? I wasn't sure. Part of me wanted to say no, make an excuse and leave. But there was something in his tone, a quiet excitement that piqued my curiosity. So I nodded. All right, show me. He led me to a door at the back of the shop that I'd never noticed before. It creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. At its center was a massive clock, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was ancient, with intricate carvings and a cracked face. The hands twitched and jerked as if they were alive, moving in a rhythm that didn't match any I knew. Where did you find this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's been in my family for generations, he said, almost reverently. But it's not just a clock, Alex, it's a window, a key to understanding time itself. I stared at him. What does that mean? Let me show you, he said, his voice calm but insistent. He flipped a switch on the side of the clock and everything changed. The room plunged into darkness, except for the clock, which began to glow faintly. A low hum filled the air, growing louder and deeper until it felt like it was vibrating in my chest. The hands of the clock spun wildly, faster than I thought possible. And then the walls seemed to dissolve. At first, it was subtle. The room seemed to ripple like a reflection in water. But then I saw them, figures emerging from the shadows. They weren't solid, their faces were blurred, their movements slow and deliberate. And they were watching me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Mr. Grayson didn't answer. He was staring at the clock, his face alight with something between awe and obsession. "They're the Watchers," he said finally. "They observe time, every moment, every decision. And now they're here for you. For me." I took a step back. "Why?" "To see if you're ready," he said simply. "Ready to understand the truth." I didn't want to understand. Whatever this was, it wasn't right. The shadows grew closer, their whispers rising into an unintelligible crescendo. My heart pounded, and my hands shook as I backed toward the door, except the door wasn't there anymore. The room stretched endlessly into darkness. "Alex, don't fight it," Mr. Grayson said, his voice calm and steady. "You'll ruin everything." "No," I whispered, my panic mounting. "I don't want this." I turned and ran toward the clock. I didn't know what I was doing, but instinct took over. I shoved it as hard as I could. The crash was deafening. The glow vanished, the whispers stopped, and the figures melted back into the shadows. When the lights came back on, the room was empty, except for Mr. Grayson, who stared at the broken clock with a mix of rage and devastation. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he hissed. Before I could answer, the bell at the front of the shop jingled. Voices called out, my mom, my neighbors, searching for me. The spell was broken. I ran past him and into the cold night, my breath coming in shaky gasps. The clock in the town square struck midnight just as I reached the crowd. I turned back once, but the shop was dark, silent, like it had never been open at all. I've tried telling people what happened, but no one believes me. Mr. Grayson disappeared after that night, and the shop has been boarded up ever since. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the faint ticking of a clock that shouldn't exist. And I know, deep down, that he's still out there, waiting for someone else to stumble into his twisted little world. The year I turned 12, New Year's Eve stopped being just about sparklers and countdowns. It became the night that changed everything for me. It's strange to think about now. That evening started like every other New Year's I could remember. My family had this tradition. We'd pack up and head to my grandparents' cabin way out in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was this old, creaky wooden house surrounded by towering pines and open skies so clear that you could see every single star. That place was magic. At least it always felt that way. Until that night. That year, the usual big gathering of relatives didn't happen. It was just my parents, my little sister Abby, and my Uncle Charlie, Dad's younger brother. Charlie had been living with us for a while. My parents said he was going through a tough time, but they didn't really explain much beyond that. I just knew he'd been really quiet lately. Not the fun, goofy Charlie I was used to, the one who always had a joke or a trick up his sleeve. This Charlie spent a lot of time staring out windows or sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee he barely drank. He wasn't sad exactly, at least not in a way I could recognize then, but it was like he was carrying something too heavy, and it was wearing him down. Still, I was excited for the trip. The cabin was my favorite place in the world, with its creaky wooden floors, big stone fireplace, and the smell of pine and old books that seemed baked into the walls. Even the drive up felt special. Twisting roads through endless forests, snow-dusted branches reaching over the car like arches. By the time we arrived, the sun was already setting. The mountains were draped in a soft, golden glow. We spent most of the day settling in, unpacking bags, lighting the fire, and decorating the cabin. Abby and I took charge of hanging tinsel and stringing lights, while Mom made cocoa and Dad fiddled with the old wood stove. Charlie didn't say much, but he helped me untangle the lights and even laughed a little when Abby decided the family dog needed a tinsel scarf. It was a quiet laugh, but it was something. As the hours passed, we all started to gear up for the main event. Midnight. Dad had brought a box of fireworks. The plan was to bundle up, head outside, and light them off when the clock struck 12. Midnight in the mountains felt special, like the whole world paused for just a moment to let the new year in. Abby and I were buzzing with excitement, counting down the minutes as we played board games by the fire. Around 11:30, I realized I'd made a mistake. I'd left my gloves out in the shed earlier when we were unloading the car. It wasn't a big deal, just a short walk through the snow. But it was freezing, and I didn't want to miss the fireworks waiting for my hands to thaw. So, I grabbed a flashlight and told Mom I'd be right back. The shed wasn't far, just past the edge of the yard, but stepping outside into that icy night felt like entering another world. Everything was so quiet. The snow muffled every sound, even my boots crunching along the path. The beam from my flashlight sliced through the dark, making long, jittery shadows that danced across the trees. I wasn't scared. Not really. The woods were familiar to me, but there was something about the silence that made my skin prickle, like the whole world was holding its breath. When I got to the shed, I swung the door open and stepped inside. It was cold and smelled like sawdust and engine oil. My gloves were sitting right on a workbench, just where I'd left them. I grabbed them, eager to get back to the warmth of the cabin. Then I heard it, a sound outside. It wasn't loud, just a soft thud, but in the stillness it might as well have been a thunderclap. I froze, every nerve in my body suddenly on edge. Slowly I peeked through a gap in the shed's wooden slats. That's when I saw him. It was Charlie. He was standing near the tree line, his back to me, his breath fogged in the cold air, rising in uneven puffs. He was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't tell what. The way he stood there, so still, staring into the woods, made my stomach knot. I almost called out to him, but something stopped me. There was a heaviness in the air, like I wasn't supposed to interrupt. And then, without warning, he stepped into the trees. I hesitated. Every logical part of me screamed to go back to the cabin and tell my parents. But something in me, the same thing that made me peek in the first place, made me stay. I waited a moment, then slipped out of the shed and followed him, keeping my distance. The woods felt different at night. Even though I knew them well, the trees seemed taller, their branches twisting into strange shapes. The snow beneath my boots seemed darker, almost gray. Charlie's footprints were easy to follow, though. They led me to a small clearing where he had stopped. He was kneeling in the snow, holding a small metal box. I crouched behind a tree, my breath clouding in front of me. I watched as he opened the box and pulled out a photograph. He stared at it for a long time, his shoulders starting to shake. Then I heard it, the sound of him crying. Not quiet, controlled tears, but the kind of sobs that seem to tear out of you, raw and broken. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was intruding on something private, something I wasn't meant to see. Then, he reached into the box and pulled out a gun. My heart stopped. Charlie. The word slipped out before I could stop it. He turned quickly, his face pale and streaked with tears. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke, his voice flat and hollow. "Go back to the cabin, kiddo." "No," I said, my voice trembling. Let's go back together. It's almost midnight." He shook his head, looking at the gun in his hand. "You don't understand," he said softly. "You're too young to understand." "Then help me understand," I said, stepping closer despite every instinct telling me to stay put. "Please, Uncle Charlie." Before he could respond, the first firework went off, a sharp crack that lit up the sky in bursts of red and gold. Charlie looked up, his face illuminated by the light. For a moment he just stared, his lips trembling. "I can't do it anymore," he whispered. Without thinking, I ran to him. I wrapped my arms around him as tightly as I could, burying my face in his coat. "Please don't," I sobbed. "We love you. I love you. Abby loves you." His whole body went still. Then slowly he dropped the gun. It landed in the snow with a soft thud. He collapsed to his knees. Pulling me into his arms, he cried into my shoulder, his sobs shaking both of us. That's how Dad found us. Me holding onto Charlie as if letting go would break him. Dad didn't ask questions. He just knelt down, wrapped his arms around both of us, stayed there until the fireworks stopped and the world went quiet again. That night didn't end with champagne or laughter. Midnight came and went in a blur of tears and whispered reassurances. The next morning, Dad drove Charlie to a place where he could get help. I didn't see him for months, but when he came back, he was different, lighter, like he'd finally put down the weight he'd been carrying. I think about that night all the time. What if I hadn't gone to the shed? What if I hadn't followed him? I'll never know for sure. But I do know this. Sometimes when someone is lost in the dark, all it takes is one voice, one small spark, to bring them back into the light. Don't forget to check out these videos. Thanks for watching.